Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the second weekly Canadian politics update. So, today we have several things on the menu. So, to first start off with this article I have here, for those following, and those, who aren't following Canadian politics, Erin O'Toole has now been elected the leader of the Conservative Party as of the 23rd, so last week. Unfortunately, I couldn't wait that long for last week for the Conservative race because I was 4 a.m. It was announced because of difficulties in counting the mail-in ballots. But here we are now. So O'Toole's the new leader and of the Conservative Party, and already O'Toole's been suggesting, calling in the news. This article basically outlines as such that he thinks Trudeau's going to force an election when the prorogue ends. Prorogue? Doesn't matter. The prorogue ends on the 23rd. His logic behind this basically boils down to he's relatively unknown. I believe there's an Ipsos poll. I don't have the Ipsos poll with me right here, but I believe there's an Ipsos poll on it that said he only had a 70% 70% of people did not know him well enough to have an opinion, and these people being Canadians. So 70% of Canadians did not have an opinion on him because they did not know him. And I think at this point we can all say that Trudeau is not a very good politician. He's not a very good candidate. He's not a very good leader. Very much a do as I say, not as I do kind of person. So O'Toole's idea here is that Trudeau knows that O'Toole's has the potential to do something well. It remains to be seen if he'll actually be able to leverage that and get support behind him. Scheer failed at that in 2019 during SNC-Lavalin, which was a huge fuck up on his part. He really failed to capitalize on that scandal. That was a really bad one, but I mean, he's pretty terrible too. So the idea behind Trudeau calling an early election is that Trudeau's getting a slight bounce in the polls right now, if we see here at the 338 Canada aggregate. So this is just the aggregate numbers with the confidence intervals here. So blue being conservative. I mean, you can see here this legend. So this has no spin on it. There's no projection. There's no demographic data mapped on it. This is just the raw polling numbers. Obviously, polling is not flawless. Polling is not even perfect, and sampling can vary wildly. Like if we just scroll down here, like 1 week Ledger is +3, or +8, +3, +7, +2, +6. So like even one company, Ledger, has a lot of bouncing. So it's hard to say how meaningful these trends are. But if we look here, started 2020, it was tight, neck and neck. Come COVID, Liberals got ahead. Conservatives dipped a bit, but they didn't lose a lot of support. It's mostly, the Liberal bump was mostly NDP getting a hit, and Green and Bloc and Conservatives all taking a small dip. And collectively, those four shifts gave Liberals a big bump. So around here, this is July, Liberals fall precipitously from 40% by Innovative on July 17th to 33% on August 1st from Ledger. Then after August 1st, though, it starts getting crazy. Because up until this point, it's pretty clear the trends are pretty reasonable. And then after August 1st, like, we have polls up here in the 40% range, one down here and below the Conservative polling numbers, some here just above around this level. But the overall trend seems to be it's kicking up a bit. Now, I put some down on this because Main Street and Innovative consistently overpoll Liberals by a lot, so I don't know if these two numbers, like these 40 and 41%, are meaningful. Ledger's not terrible at doesn't overpoll Liberals that much, so their 38 is something more to be considered. But as we're noting, even with 38 to 30 that Ledger polled last week is a losing, or sorry, it was last week, is a majority proposition for the Liberals. So it's a dangerous, or it's a very strong position Trudeau's in, even with the Wee scandal. So I think there is a lot to be said that they're going to try to push, that Trudeau could push for an election right here. There's a bunch of other things that the Liberals are going on really hard right now, especially with their favorite, with their totally not biased, totally legitimate, honest news organizations who are also pushing these things. So we go here to this article from the Toronto Star, a really good, very unbiased, definitely not owned by the Liberals media company, sitting here, and they're commenting on, well, we're going to get angry Erin, a fired right-winger who rallied against Justin Trudeau and the CPC and the Chinese government for the past 8 months or so, and promised to take back Canada from whomever it was who supposedly snatched it away, or an inclusive Erin that he was on his election, or his winning speech for when he won the Conservative leadership race. Now, what I have to say about this, and this is what pisses me off about all this, it's very subtle, until I point it out to you. So, some of the big things OToole stands for is he wants to defund the CBC because it's garbage and terrible, which is true. I mean, they have worse primetime ratings than any other news company in Canada, and they get billions of taxpayer dollars. And they, I mean, for Christ's sake, in 2019 election, one of the main presenters of CPC, Rosemary Barton, literally sued the Conservative Party for fair use of taxpayer-funded video. Wow. In an election. It was dismissed immediately, but the fact that they did that is just mind-blowing. So, it's a very subtle spin. The Canadian news is very good at the subtle spin, if you're not looking for it. So, emphasis here is to take back Canada from whoever it was supposedly snatched away from. He's not saying take back Canada as in, like, elves conquered Canada and now elves are oppressing us. It's take back Canada as a rallying cry to conservative or anti-liberal Trudeau base who don't like Trudeau's reckless spending and divisive intersectionalist rhetoric that seeks to divide people based off of arbitrary classes like race, gender, social standing, and not actually meaningful things. He's like, Trudeau doesn't try to organize people and rally people behind a meaningful goal. He tries to divide people, pit men against women, whites against blacks against Asians against whatever, rich against poor, to divide people, to make them too busy to fighting with each other, to think and sit there on what Trudeau actually does. And that taking back Canada is removing that. Uniting us together. We're all living in Canada. Doesn't matter what race you are. Doesn't matter what gender you are. Doesn't matter what religion, what sexual orientation you have. Doesn't matter. What matters is, do you believe in Canadian ideals? And that's basically what he's saying. And Toronto Star, the glorious, unbiased, totally legit. I mean, this is an op-ed, but it's no surprise it's op-eds in the Toronto Star. But we also get the Washington Post basically doing the exact same thing. He literally said literally almost the same word for word. We go to this page. We go to this Global News article where they're trying to imply that Erin O'Toole supports systemic racism or won't acknowledge its existence. When, if you actually read the whole article, I'm not going to read it to you verbatim. You can see the link on there. You could copy the link if you actually want to read the whole thing. But to summarize it, the article's like, in the interview, O'Toole's being like, yeah, racism's bad. We need to destroy racism everywhere. But he doesn't want to use the term systemic because it's ill-defined. It has no concrete definition, and it just pits people against each other. It belittles people, good, honest people, in the military, in RCMP, in civil services across Canada. It belittles them by implying that they are inherently racist, or that the organization they work for is racist and does racist things. That's obviously not a generalizable statement. Not everybody in the RCMP could possibly ever be racist. If that's so, I mean, is there even a point in fighting racism? We've lost. We've lost at that point. The entire RCMP in the military, in the government is racist. We've lost. GG, it's over. Start again. And that's actually the message they want. Trudeau wants to start over again. I mean, just look into his rhetoric right now. I don't have an article on it, but he's talking about completely reshaping the Canadian economy right now. Like, he wants a do-over. He believes Canada is lost, and that is bullshit. Canada is not the best. It's not a perfect country. There's a lot of things I dislike about Canada. But I wouldn't choose to live anywhere else, barring it getting stupider here. And there's potential for that if Trudeau has his way. And they're really trying to paint O'Toole as a bigot, as a bad person, to make it easier for him to win the next election. Because, let's be honest, name a person who likes Trudeau personally. They exist, but I live in the Maritimes. I can't find somebody who genuinely likes Trudeau. The only people I can find are people who like him. He's the lesser of evils. And that's not an endorsement. If the only people that I can talk to in an area that overwhelmingly voted Liberal think Trudeau's the lesser of evils, that's not an endorsement of this guy. And he gets worse over time as we find out more and more about the corruption in his government, more radical policies he's spending. If we actually go here, we see in the sidebar, bond rating agencies send economic warning to Trudeau, and that's about his plan for significant quote-unquote climate change spending, which is ill-defined. Maybe he's going to define it more later, but basically going to boil down to spending money, billions of taxpayer dollars during an economic downturn for quote-unquote green electricity and renovating green buildings, as per Jerry Butts, one of the greatest, most honest, bestest Canadians, who's definitely not biased and doesn't want to do bad things. And to continue with my original point, CPC here, glorious CPC, is trying to paint social conservative strength as something that O'Toole is courted and is indebted to, and oh gosh, the social conservatives are going to hold him back. Whew. So let's stop here for a second. What does Sloan want? What were the things Sloan was asking for in the leadership race? Okay, he wanted to reduce immigration because he thought we were having too many immigrants come in relative to our population size compared to other countries, and it was overheating our housing market. And we had a ton of unemployment right now, 13.7% last I checked. So you can't even say we need immigrants to fill job vacancies. We have plenty of people who have no jobs. And it's also worth noting, too, that 13.7% unemployment could very well hide who knows how many thousands of people who are involuntarily unemployed and have left the job market because there's no job opportunities, so they stopped looking. So we don't need to bring in labor because we have plenty of unemployment. Our housing markets are overheating, which, if we remember back to 2008 in the US, that's a really bad thing, because eventually people are going to realize the houses aren't actually worth the value they're worth, and they're going to stop bidding each other up. Especially right now when COVID and the riots going on in the US, people are starting to realize, oh wait, cities aren't actually worth living in because we can just do most of our work at home. it's a ticking time bomb. So, but apparently that's evil, and that's racist, and that's bad, and that's not something we can discuss. We can't discuss a number. How many immigrants is a good number? Because there's an objective, like, I would say 0 is probably not a good idea, because we have labor shortages, and at the very minimum, we have labor shortages in certain fields, like doctors right now. So immigrants to fill those labor shortages that we can't easily organically fill makes sense. Infinite immigrants also doesn't make sense, because if we just had everyone immigrate to Canada, I mean, we wouldn't have Canada anymore. That wouldn't be the country, that would just be the world in a very small landmass. Relative to the world's landmass, I should say. So any pretense that this is still Canada would be gone. So that doesn't make sense. You're not a country if everyone in the world lives in your country. And so by mathematics, we can prove, I can't think of the name of the math theorem, but if we have 2 fixed points that are bad, or that are 0 being how good this is, no immigrants is not good, all the immigrants is not good. So we have 2 fixed points that are worth 0. At some point, this is positive. I phrased that wrong. That's not what I meant to say. You'll have to bear with me. The analogy is the same thing, but I just phrased it wrong. So no immigrants is bad, because is a negative factor, because we have no jobs, or we have labor shortages. Then at some point, as we get it, we'll have some immigrants, and we fill those labor shortages. Then we get to a top point at some point, and we go back down to another negative point, which is we have no longer a country because everyone lives here in the world. And anything that made Canada special no longer exists, because there's plenty of people in the world who completely fundamentally disagree with everything about Canada. And that's their right. They can disagree with all of our values and all of our things, but if they're coming to Canada, they should at least acknowledge that we are our own thing. They should integrate to Canada. But so we have 2 negative points. So, and I'm hypothesizing that there's a positive point. So at some point, it crosses the 0 axis. So the discussion is, where are we in this curve? That makes sense. So either the curve is positive at some point, and we can discuss the number, or the curve is never positive, it is never a good thing, so we should not ever have any. We can discuss that. I think it's positive at some point, but that's a worthwhile thing to discuss. But according to CPC, nope. Let's look at another thing. Abortion, everyone's favorite topic. What did Sloan want? He wanted to ban sex-selective abortions. Okay. Is that a bad thing? Should we relish the idea of people coming in and selectively killing their daughters because they don't want them? Is that something we want? We want in a free country? Doesn't seem like a good thing. I can't think of any rational argument for why that is an acceptable policy. Or something else we wanted to ban was coerced abortions. So, i.e., you are a female who is pregnant, but the father of the baby, or your parents, or the father's parents, pressure you into aborting the baby that you don't want to do. You don't want to abort the baby, but they are pressuring you to do it. You want to make that a crime. Like, if we're talking about being pro-choice, isn't that a pro-choice position to stop people from pressuring women to do a choice that they don't want to do? The woman wanted to keep the baby, and they're being pressured by everyone around them to get rid of it, to kill it. Shouldn't we celebrate then to make that a crime, so the woman can make the choice herself? That's assuming you even like pro-choice arguments, but if you're pro-choice, that should be a pro-choice position. I don't know how you could argue against that. A couple other things like that, but they're all in the same vein. He's not talking about no abortions ever again. He's saying some of these really bad things that happen on the edges of the abortion story, like you have a book, and some of the pages in the book are bad. That's a really bad analogy. You have a bucket of apples. Some of the apples are bad. He wants to take the bad apples out of the bucket. You could argue all of the apples are bad if you're pro-life, but I can't think of any rational pro-choice position who sits there and it's like, you know what? It's okay to pressure women into having an abortion. It's okay. Let's bully those women. Yeah, bullying women, really empowering. Oh yeah. So, I guess to make my point is, CPC demonizes 40% of the Conservative Party by voters. And presumably, that's obviously not going to map perfectly to the electorate, but that presumably means a large portion of the electorate also believes these things. And if you actually look at polling data, young people are more socially conservative than older people. It's something like 22% of people who are under 30 are pro-life. That is the largest demographic that is pro-life in this country. So it's clearly a large segment of people. That's just one issue, obviously. More people, it's a much larger number. I think actually the majority, I don't have the polling. I didn't think to bring up the polls for this, and I don't want to fumble around trying to find them during the video, because this is recorded live in case anyone didn't know. So it's a large issue. A lot of people in Canada feel this way, and they belittle them. They make it sound like they're holding him hostage, and it's bullshit. It's like it's a small percentage of Canadians. It's a meaningful percentage of Canadians who have a meaningful, honest position that they want to talk about. Everyone should have the right to talk about what they want to talk about, and we should all debate it. Nothing is sacrosanct. Nothing is verboten. We can all discuss it. Some things are wrong. I will firmly point many positions that I think are wrong. If someone holds that position, my first response isn't to try to cancel them or say they're terrible or that they're bad, but to try to convince them that the position is wrong. You don't make people better by silencing them or belittling them. You make society better, and you make people change their minds by talking to them in an honest conversation. And we get to this. This is the one that actually makes me angry. Liberals attempt to cancel Sloan. So the Liberal Party, as soon as Erin O'Toole is elected, the first time they even talk about Sloan, ask him to remove him from the caucus. And I'm just sitting here, and I'm going to do that. And I'm just sitting here being like, Sloan was elected by people as part of the Conservative Party. He had 16% of the Conservative base support him in the leadership race. On first ballot. Who knows how many would have supported him on second ballot? Like, let's say hypothetically, Lewis came came fourth in round one. I bet you most of Lewis's supporters would have switched to Sloan first, as most of Sloan's supporters went to Lewis first. It's hard to say if Sloan could have won. I'm not really sure where O'Toole supporters would have went if O'Toole lost. I don't think Sloan would win if it came down to Peter MacKay or Sloan. But if it came down between O'Toole and Sloan, but it was Peter MacKay and Sloan, I think that's a really tricky position. That's hard to say. I think O'Toole would win versus Sloan, is what I'm trying to say. O'Toole probably also wins versus Lewis, but I don't know if Peter MacKay beats either of those two, if it's just a two-way race. It's hard to say. I think Lewis probably would beat, especially as we see more first-round voting intentions. I think Lewis would probably beat Sloan in a two-way race, but it's just because, from my arbitrary scale, Lewis is slightly to the left of Sloan. So like if Sloan's like a 7 out of 10, she's like a 6 out of 10. So she's probably more likely to be the first choice of like the Peter MacKay part of the party, who are more centrists. Like the center-right part of the Conservative Party versus the solid right, or I guess a better way to say it, I think that's the best way to say it. The center-right section, I think, is more likely to vote. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked here. Point of the matter is, The Liberals try to be high and mighty, calling for Sloan to get booted out of the party. When if we scroll down here, this Marwa Tabara was allowed to run in 2015 and ran again in 2019 when he was later charged with 2 assault charges and a break and enter. Like, that was literally, he was accused during, he was being investigated during the race in 2019. But that's okay. It's okay when they allow someone who's being investigated for sexual assault, sexual harassment, to run. But, oh boy, Sloan wants to talk about immigration numbers and maybe not pressuring women into killing their child, their kids, their babies. Oh, wow, what a terrible person. What a horrible guy. He needs to be kicked out of Canada, banned, abolished, cancelled. Doesn't deserve to exist. Though I find it really funny, actually. They're trying to bully Erin into doing this because, I mean, O'Toole's literal thing is he's fighting cancel culture, and they're trying to cancel Sloan. So what the fuck do they think they're going to do? They're obviously trying to tar and feather O'Toole to make him look like he's in the pockets of the social conservatives. But, I mean, I hope Canadians don't fall for it. I just hope that. But to pivot a bit, I wasn't going to talk about this originally, but this happened yesterday. I just noticed this. And it deserves to be talked about. It is a concern for us in Canada here. So, vandalism of our history. John A MacDonald statue in Montreal was toppled down by activists. That's what I said. I don't want to say protesters because I don't believe this is a legitimate form of protest. And they're not technically rioting, so I'm going to call them activists. Activists tore down a statue of the first Prime Minister of this country, and the police did nothing. The feds are doing nothing. Justin Trudeau doesn't even acknowledge it happened, or if he has at this point. He hasn't condemned it. Yesterday he had no comment. So, OToole, thankfully, condemned it immediately, and I strongly support him for that, because this is how it started in the US. Activists, far left activists, were tearing down statues. It started with Confederate generals. Then it moved to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Grant, Catholic saints, people who should be celebrated because they did good things. I challenge anybody to honestly tell me that George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or Abraham Lincoln or General Grant were worse for history than they were better for it. As with Sir John A MacDonald, I challenge anybody who watches this video to give me one example of how not having Sir John A MacDonald, and by proxy Canada, would be better than any alternative history that you could reasonably create. And I'm a huge history buff, so I can probably critique and destroy any history argument you put to me, unless it's actually legitimately sound. But that's not the point. The point is it starts with tearing down these statues, and law enforcement doesn't react appropriately. The feds don't react appropriately. Prosecution doesn't happen. Then these mobs of activists go further. And they go further. And they go further. This happened in the US this summer. It starts with tearing down statues. Then it's large-scale protest. Then it's rioting. Then it's looting. Then it's murder. Now you have people fighting on the streets in the US. A guy was shot in the head last night for no reason. Actually, not in the head. But a guy was shot and killed in Portland for no reason last night. You had the bullshit that happened in Kenosha, which I think, well, enough said. I don't want to get that too much into the U.S. politics on it, but it escalates very quickly. If you're not sitting here worried about this, well, you haven't watched the U.S. news. It escalates fast. Maybe it won't escalate here. Maybe we'll just stay at tearing down this statue. But if the government doesn't act, if law enforcement doesn't push back against criminal action, it only emboldens them more. So I'm going to leave you on that note. If you like this video, I'd like you to press like, subscribe, share with your friends, spread the news. I'm trying to push back against all this garbage Canadian news media. There's pretty much all talk news in Canada. There's some good newspaper sources these days, but they're, or like online sources, but the talk news, like cable news, for example, terrible. And there's really not many commentators online that I've ever found. So really trying to push back on this. So if you can help me support the channel, that'd be really appreciated. I'll see you guys next week with the next update. Thank you for watching.